Hey everybody, welcome to the Diabetes Empowerment Summit. I'm your host, Danielle Harkenrader, founder of the Diabetes Empowerment Summit, Diabetes Dominator Coaching, and Love Yourself to Health group coaching membership. Today I'm here with two amazing guys that are working at a company that I'm a big supporter of because I use their product and also because they're really probably the most innovative thing that's happening in insulin now and any time recently. So I'm going to read very quick bios and then we're going to get right into the good stuff. So David Kendall is the Chief Medical Officer for MannKind Corporation. In this role, he's responsible for leading MannKind's scientific research, clinical development, regulatory, and medical affairs activity. His career includes over 30 years of experience in diabetes and metabolism research and policy advocacy. And Dave Akers is a territory business manager for MannKind, has been working all over the diabetes industry for the last 15 years, and is currently happily living with type 1 diabetes and using Afrezza. So thank you to Dave and David. For those watching, Dave is on top, David is on the bottom. David Kendall on the bottom, Dave Akers on top. And thank you for taking the time to join me, guys. I appreciate it. How are you today?
Yeah, doing well, Danielle. Thanks so much for having me on again, and great to join the Diabetes Empowerment group once again.
Yes. And how are you over there?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Yeah, excited
Absolutely.
to be here.
Cool. All right, so let's really kind of get into Afrezza. So for me, and we were actually talking about this off the air, and I think it's a great place to start. We were talking about how Dave he has worked in the diabetes industry for companies for products that he's actually used himself. And we kind of agreed that that's something called alignment and integrity, because for me as a person in the diabetes space for over 10 years, I get tons of requests from companies, food, medical, review this, tell people. And I always say back, I will never talk about a product that I don't use myself. That just doesn't, to me, it doesn't work. So I kind of want to hear from Dave Akers just to kind of go into that a little bit more. What got you to MannKind and what got you to using Afrezza, and why are you so passionate about it now?
Yeah, when I 4 years ago, when I launched Afrezza working with Sanofi, it was a pretty good launch. There were some things that were we still needed to figure out at Sanofi, and unfortunately, I think it hurt the product a little bit on a larger scale, but I saw it working faster than anything that has ever been on the market before. And I'm like, holy cow, if my blood sugar is 200 and I take a 4, I'm good an hour later. I mean, you take a shot of rapid-acting analog and you're good maybe 2.5 to 3 hours later. Maybe. And then at the 3rd or 4th hour, you realize I'm still trending down, getting my lower end of my target. You got to correct. So you're running that roller coaster. Afrezza, come down, and it levels off beautifully. Yeah. And that just got me really involved with the product for corrections, because I was on a pump then. I thought it only worked for corrections because the fixed dosing, right? I've always been on 1.25 units or 2.7 units. And I don't carb count anymore. Yeah. I don't carb count, I guess. And it's just so freeing. Yeah. And so when I got the opportunity to come here at MannKind, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I saw the stat data come out, and I started with the company shortly thereafter in November of 18. That's when I was hired on, shortly after stat came out, I think it was. And I saw the supplemental dosing, and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it, because who on rapid-acting analog thinks they can dose an hour after your first meal? Or after your first. You don't do it. You don't do it unless you're still trending up.
Sometimes it's called rage bolusing.
300, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just so amazing to have that much control over insulin. That's a fixed dose, for crying out loud. It's inconceivable. Somebody, for me, who was on rapid-acting analog for 12, 13 years, and now going to fixed.
And I want to just touch on that too, because that's a really important point that you made. There's a lot of questions that I was saying I have a YouTube video that I made in 2017, because I've been also using Afrezza since 2016, and I've never stopped. But unlike Dave, I'm still using a pump, but I've talked about this before, because a 4-unit is way too much, and I'm still praying and hoping that one day a 2-unit cartridge will exist in the world. But until it does, I need to continue on my pump. But I think that's one of the hardest things that anybody that I've worked with, because I've recommended Afrezza to so many people, I've lost count, and tons of people are continuing to use it. At first, the biggest kind of apprehension is, well, what is the exact dose? It's very difficult to step back from that pragmatic, like X amount of carbs equals X amount of this, and it's very fixed. But with Afrezza, you really can't approach it like that because it doesn't work that way. So I'm glad you brought that up. And for people out there, it's like, I think it's a process of self-exploration and experimentation that can become very empowering to like know how confident that you can be to kind of not count as many carbs. And same for you. I took an Afrezza earlier today. I don't know what got me going, but something in the afternoon, didn't even eat. Blood sugar was shot up. I was at like 103, 103, 103. All of a sudden I'm getting my alert at 150 and I'm like 2 arrows up. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, you know what? I'm not even messing with this. I just puffed the 4 unit of Afrezza and then I evened out at 94 and that's it. Like, and this is not, this is actually what happens. So I don't know if you want to comment more on that, or if David, you want to add anything or give a little insight.
I think, yeah, Danielle and Dave, thanks, one, for having me along for this ride. Like Dave, I came to MannKind driven by the passion of the innovation that Al Mann envisioned when he put Technosphere insulin into the marketplace. What you and Dave are just talking about, I think, is something we have worked very hard to understand, and that's where the speed at which Afrezza works really does seem to supersede the perceived precision that so many people had with dialing up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, or, on a pump taking 4.2 unit boluses. I always sort of, toss my head back and laugh when I hear that, because half of that 4.2 units is going to work 2, 3, 4, 5 hours after you inject it. So how much of that precision is actually targeting your meal, or the correction for that matter? So we say speed supersedes precision, at least based on the information we've been able to accumulate. And as you described, Danielle, it is an exploration. And I remind my colleagues, and I was reminded of this throughout my clinical practice career, if you ask someone what their insulin dose is, they'll laugh at you because, of course, it's different every day, every time, every set of circumstances. But to be able to take a 4, 8, 12 unit cartridge to know that most of the effect is going to be accounted for by its speed, not by the precision of the dose, really does, it sort of takes one of those variables, and Dave, you talked about another, which is carb counting. I've taught carb counting, I've lived with carb counting for 20 years. I'm horrible at it. So, how am I to expect my insulin to match my horrible carb counting? So we think that Afrezza offers a really unique option for those that have either been frustrated with or perplexed by the perceived precision of what they've been doing with injected insulin. So speed supersedes precision for a lot of people who learn to use Afrezza.
And then I think to add on to that, once you begin using it, just like anything, with experience, you gain insight. With that insight, you gain intuitive knowledge about, okay, well, the last few times I did this, I needed this. And then I've actually had the experience where I will use Afrezza for meals along in tandem with my pump. But I'll say I'll take a 4 unit now, and then I'll wait. And then maybe because, and I want to touch on this, people, know regular insulin and analog insulin will go 4 or 5 hours, like you said, but this Afrezza is out of your system, and I don't want to get this wrong, in like maximum 3 hours, is that it?
Even with the highest doses.
Sometimes less. I was going to say, for me, I feel like it's actually less than 3 hours. So you don't get that tail off, and you what I do is I'll wait till that tail off happens, and I'll see what's happening. Luckily, I'm grateful to have a CGM, and then I might need to take another 4 later on, depending on if it's, Thanksgiving or something where there's clearly going to be a large intake and a long day filled with carbohydrate-filled food.
You got to have your cheat days.
Absolutely.
I just had my birthday, made homemade Philly cheesesteak sandwiches, homemade fries. I went to town, and I challenged myself. I really did.
Yeah.
I really did. And
Dave, it's not called cheating, it's called reality.
Yes, I agree. I don't like that word either. I agree, because it's not cheating. It's called humanity, living, joy, and moderation. When I say everything in moderation, including moderation.
I love that. My grandfather said that. He's 104.
Sweet. I was just told that I have an old soul. I don't know if that's really where that came from. But no, it's true. And I was just actually interviewed by the JDRF for nutrition stuff, and I was talking about how much I love potatoes. Like, I don't think they're a bad food. I eat them a bunch of different ways, and I have no qualms with eating potatoes. And I'm not telling anyone that that's the right way for them to do it, but I am saying it's really helpful for me to have, for me, it's a peace of mind. The reason why I love Afrezza, and I talk about, you guys can kind of go further on this, is more than anything is the peace of mind, because what you said versus you said, and David said about you inject or you bolus and then you 3-4 hours later make, and that's the thing. What usually ended up happening before that is that I would wait and wait and wait, and then I wouldn't see the movement that I wanted to see on my CGM, and then I'd bolus again, and then I wouldn't see it, and then I'd bolus again, and then instead of just a little crash, it was like a huge crash. It's like, this is more cut and dry. I see the rise, I take the Afrezza, I know it's going to work, and I don't have to keep thinking and looking back at my CGM. Is this working? Is this working? Yeah. I know it's working within 15 minutes because you can already see it trending down, and it just opens up mental and emotional space, as odd as that sounds. And I don't know if Dave, you feel that as well.
You know what? I when I first joined MannKind, we were on a webinar with the company or a conference call, and I had mentioned, I just spoke out because my experience after 3 months with the Afrezza was amazing. You know how your iPhone tracks your usage on your different apps? So my Dexcom, when I was on my pump and doing mainly pump, I was using my app, my Dexcom app, about, I think it was an hour and a half a day on average, meaning I had it open, physically looking at it, doing activity in it. When I completely switched off of my pump to one longer acting basal injection a day and Afrezza, my usage on my Dexcom app, I didn't even know it went down to 45 minutes average a day. And that's consistent. And it's like the American way. You want to put less in and get more out, in a sense. I mean, I love it because I never had to think about diabetes as much. I don't think about diabetes as much anymore. I just, insulin comes in, it goes out. I love to swim. I love to work out. I can go into a workout, or I could take my Afrezza an hour before my workout, go into the workout with no insulin on board, or relatively no insulin on board, very little. It's not going to impact my workout. And it's life-changing. I can be reactive to my blood sugars.
Yeah.
Because it works so quickly.
Yeah, and I was going to say, maybe, David, you could comment. And again, I think we talked about this last year, and it's probably similar. It's like, for me, it's just this matter of like, why is everybody not aware of this? And I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, but can we talk about how we can make this more accessible, or how people can get to it? I just want to say that MannKind, or at least I believe they still have a directory on the website where you can find doctors that have already prescribed Afrezza. And if you're in the Philadelphia area, you can email me. You can find my information on the website, and I'll tell you the endocrinologist that I go to, because I'm always trying to help people get it. And most of the time, and I have tons of colleagues, doctors, CDEs, RNs, the whole gamut, and I tell them about it and they don't know, and this is killing me. And I know you guys have a lot of fights you're fighting behind the scenes.
Yeah, and Danielle, like you and Dave, I've spent decades in this business and working with people, doing everything they can to manage diabetes in the setting of the rest of their life. And what you describe with Afrezza, which I believe we slowly get traction. We are a small interest in a world with a very large interest and a lot of information coming people's way. Pump information, CGM information, new insulins, including Afrezza, which I still consider new. Your point earlier, which is that experience is what drives your experience, meaning you have to use it to use it. So as we see more people, both at the level of those living with diabetes and practitioners, learning to use Afrezza, we see, in a sense, testimonials, meaning now I've learned to use it. This is much like the transition from human insulin to the analogs. You mean I can take my insulin about the time I eat? Now with Afrezza, you clip it in, you take your inhalation, and truly in the moment, you see just what you described earlier. This works within 35 to 45 minutes. It is out of the system at the lowest doses, Danielle, on average, it's 90 minutes. So what many people have learned, which is I'm going to wait an hour or two for my injected insulin to work, and then if I dare, I may take a second dose, but the risk of combining or stacking those doses is high. That's turned on its head, meaning now I can dose in the moment, and not only can I consider a supplemental dose, as Dave talked about, but in many cases, I should take a supplemental dose. And I think some of that understanding has actually come from the insulin pump space. We know that the average pump user boluses 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. So supplemental dosing is part and parcel of how people think about their diabetes. we believe we now have an insulin that not only allows that, but allows you to benefit from that. And I love Ann Peters, my colleague here in the LA area, saying, you know what, this isn't a supplement, this is a touch-up dose. I am just adjusting my position on the road. And Dave, you in real time just showed us what that looks like. So Dave, I'd be interested, given that you mentioned it, your experience using those touch-up doses, as I think you just did.
You know what, I conceptually think of it as, it might be a little bit different what you just described, but I consider it kind of like to people who are on a pump, like a combo or a square wave or a dual wave bolusing, right? Yep. So I guess the carb count of my meal, but I think what we haven't done a lot in diabetes education for the patient is understanding how much fat or protein is in your meal and how that affects the absorption of those carbs. And I don't think about it anymore because I just let my Dexcom tell me when I need to bolus. So I think a prime example is, you know, I love sushi, and when I was on the pump, I kind of bolused a half hour before going to the sushi restaurant because that sushi rice gets in and it goes, right? Yeah. It just hits you quick. But now I just kind of wait till my Dexcom hits my upper threshold of my high. I've set it at, I don't know, Dave, I hope I can talk about this, but I'm a patient. I set my high threshold at 140. Okay,
at 150 for all clarity.
I know a 4-unit will drop me 60 points after 5 or 6 trials when I first started Afrezza. I know that's my max. It'll drop me 60 points. So I wait till it hits 140, and if it hits there, I take a 4 without thinking about it. But if I'm eating with that, I just add another 4 or an 8 based on my estimate of how many carbs I'm eating. So I take that first dose, and then you know what? I want another sushi roll. I do it, and I wait till my Dex hits that 140 threshold again, and it beeps at me. It vibrates on the table. I'm like, oh, I need another hit. I need another I need another dose. You know?
Yeah, and Danielle, sorry, Dave. This actually reminds me of what I think Afrezza and new technology offers people, and that's to reduce the hassle factor. So yes, there is a hassle in what you described, which is learning to use it. How does it work for me? But just like any new approach, once you've been able to overcome that, Dave, I love your story about how much time you spent looking at your numbers. Once you have the confidence to either minimize or reduce that hassle factor as relates to when's my insulin going to work, how quickly is it going to work, how much is it going to hit me, and do I have to think about my exercise 4 hours later or my sushi roll 30 minutes before I have it. I hate to say that, you know, when I advise patients to inject 5 to 15 minutes, or in the old days 45 minutes before a meal, I very readily admitted I never know when it's 45 minutes before my next meal.
Seriously,
so
very rarely.
Who am I to give that advice? So,
you know, I've got 2 kids at home. I've got 2 stage 5 clingers at dinner time, right? I think I'm going to eat, and then, you know, I got to take care of somebody's diaper, or I've got to, you know, go chase one around the living room to bring him back to the dinner table. I thought I was going to eat, and with a pump, it made it really challenging. So I just said, you know what, I'd rather go high than low. So I bolus at mealtime with a pump.
And that's what I do if I'm having a carb-heavy meal and I'm going to use Afrezza. I actually will not take it until I get to above a certain level because, like I know, unlike Dave, I know that a 4-unit will drop me approximately 100 milligrams per deciliter. So, like, I'm waiting until I know some of those carbs have actually had time to get through and absorb so that when I do take the inhalation, because for me it works, you say 30 minutes, or I start seeing something within 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, it's, to say rapid is an understatement. So I actually would very rarely, if ever, take the Afrezza prior to eating because I'm a little bit fearful, but based on my experience, I think that's the right, for me, the right avenue to.
Yeah, and Danielle, you're right. It's truly with meals for the first time, you know, in at least my clinical career, and what you've observed, that it works within 10 to 15 minutes. The first effects of Afrezza are generally observed within those first 15 minutes. The peak effect, just like those who make their own insulin, generally occurs within 30 to 45 minutes after the inhalation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know, Dave, did you take the Afrezza while we were talking prior, or are you still waiting?
No, not yet. I'm actually
waiting.
My Dexcom's almost on my upper limit, actually. It's got an up air. I had a sandwich about maybe a half hour ago.
Okay.
But I actually, oh, it just hit it. All right.
Oh, wow. And I swear, we were just talking about this off the air. So
Real time.
So that's an 8, right?
Yeah.
That's an 8, yeah.
An 8-unit cartridge. Yeah, the
8-unit cartridge.
Yep.
Green.
And he's just going to hold his breath for a few seconds. That's what I do to make sure that it can absorb, and then he can just breathe like normal. I mean,
Go about your day.
That's it. That was him taking insulin. That's legitimately what the entire process looks like. So for most people, that's like, for most people with type 1, like for me, almost 30 years. I'm in my 29th year. You know, when I first heard about this from a friend who was at a conference, I always say this, the diabetes community is a very strong community, and we often do things illegally. And by illegally, I mean, hey, somebody has some Afrezza at a conference. My blood sugar's high. I'd like to try it. Can I try some of your Afrezza? And the guy's like, of course you can. And then, you know, he gave me his information. And then I came back to tell my doctor about it. And she had never heard of it before. But I had already been getting it on the underground. Again, this has nothing to do with MannKind. They were not involved in this. But I told her the benefits that it was already providing for me. And after I told her that, she said, okay, I'm going to go look this up. I'll get back to you. And then she called me back, and she's been prescribing it to me ever since. And I introduced it to her. And I just want to say that as like a way for people who are out there watching, if you have that ability too. Your doctors, I think, if they're good doctors, will want to learn from your user experience, their patient experience, from whatever you get to do. That way they can take that back and help other patients do better. So don't be afraid to teach your doctor something. You know, you don't need, I think you have to go in from a place of kindness and compassion and not say, you're an idiot, you should know about this, because, you know, that's going to turn the doctor off. But, you know, just say, hey, this has been helping me. I know some people this has been helping. I think it'd be really great if we could explore it. Don't be afraid to like have those conversations. And I don't know, David, do you feel that way when you were working with patients? Like,
absolutely. Danielle, I was about to say, you know, I learned much more about the advice I would provide around diabetes management from those living with diabetes than I could ever learn from a textbook, from a clinical study, from any of the data. The data set the foundation, but it was really the benefit I had of working with literally thousands of individuals who taught me about their life with diabetes. And I think, to your point, we are almost always our best advocates. So if we can step forward and inform those who guide our care, we are the better for it. And you obviously had that experience. You helped a provider become a better provider.
Yes, I agree. And I would also say, this to take it a little further, since I am known for my outspokenness, that if your provider is not open to this, you might want to find a new provider. That's just my opinion.
Sorry. Yeah.
Please comment on that if you will. Yes.
Danielle, I always use the analogy of a financial planner. If they're not helping you plan your finances, you should probably find another financial planner as well. So same rule applies. It's your money. It's your diabetes to manage. So.
You know, with type 1 diabetes, it's about insulin management. It's not like type 2 where you've got 7 or 8 different classes of oral medications or injectables to take. You have to replace what's missing, which in this case it's insulin, right? So with the rapid-acting analogs, that's, you know, it's great. It's 20-year-old insulin technology with its pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic profile. I used it for 12 years extremely successfully. Whether it's injections or pumps, you're still delivering the same subcutaneous injections, right? And you can't change the PK/PD of that regardless if it's a pump, right? We've got all these artificial pancreas systems, which I think are amazing. They're going to be great, but I feel like they're compensating for the lag of insulin technology that is available for a pump. And if a patient does not allow the option of a different way to do it, one thing I like to say is, you know, patients, regardless of the disease state or whatever our case, we don't like to change their behaviors very often, okay? So as a patient with type 1, if your behavior is to dose at mealtime, which, you know, Dr. Kendall, I don't know what the statistic is on that, but what's the percent of patients that dose at mealtime? Do we have real-world data?
90+% of people.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of know the answer. You're the doctor. I'll let you say that. But, you know, that's the reality. Don't change the behavior of the patient, because that's an uphill battle. Change the medication the patient's taking and match their existing behavior. So if you're dosing 5 minutes before mealtime or at mealtime, let them dose at mealtime. don't inject it, inhale it. I mean, there's no better way than to manage diabetes in the moment. Okay. And with somebody who's a father of 2 young girls, a dad, a husband, you know, and a full-time employee on the road, you know, I've never had an easier time managing diabetes. With a pump, it's great, but you got to manage the diabetes tools. You got to change the battery, or if you're the Tandem, you got to charge it. You got to change your infusion sets. You got to deal with occlusion alerts. You got to deal with low cartridge warnings. You got to fill that. You got to keep all those extra supplies on you. And I take this and this and this with me. I have 1 shot a night I take every night for basal. I take this during the day, and this is all I need to manage during the next 12 hours of my day. It's just less time involvement, and my outcomes have never been better. If I can publicize this, I've never had 80% plus time in range for a 90-day period on pumps, and I have it now with 1 shot a day and about probably 5 to 7 inhalations a day based on what I'm eating.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like Dr. Kendall was talking about, the micro bolusing, more bolusing during the day. You can do that this way as well and have more management of your insulin, your diabetes around food, around activity. I don't have to plan as much. I just don't have to pre-plan. It's a lot of cognitive thinking that I don't think doctors always are aware of with the patient.
No, they're not.
They are not.
And I was going to say, if David, if you would want to, because Dave mentioned outcomes, and I think that's a really important thing to talk about. It's about what we're after, which is better A1Cs, more time in range, and more spaciousness in our thought cycles, right? So, I mean, I don't know if you have statistics, and it's okay if you don't, but I mean, every person that I ever hear about, that I talk to personally, that has decided to use Afrezza has had better outcomes. And that's kind of what I know doctors and medical professionals, which a lot of people at this viewing this summit are, that they're concerned about, which I consider the dirtiest word ever, compliance. I don't ever want to talk about that word. It's a terrible word. It's a dehumanizing word. But if we're talking to medical professionals who use that word and are familiar with that word, if that's what you're after, Afrezza is going to help you and your patient achieve that outcome. Would you, David, agree?
Absolutely, and you won't hear me use that word because it is about choices, and it's about having the flexibility and freedom to do the things that, you know, allow you to live your life. With you, Danielle, that's a lot of fitness, exercise, nutrition. The things you do are honestly amazing. The outcomes you talked about, and Dave alluded to this, which is, I think, to borrow from my friend Rich Bergenstahl, when using CGM, what folks are looking for is more green and less red, meaning as much time in range, whatever your individual ranges may be, the tools that you use to get more green and less red are the ones that not only change, quote, outcomes, meaning limit the risk of what may come from high glucoses, but they allow people to live their life. In one small study that Dave referred to, which is an outcome study, short as it might have been, individuals who moved from injections to Dexcom using the G5 at the time and Afrezza, if they did what Dave described, which is take a dose and then as needed supplement or touch up at an hour or two, they did increase time in range using Afrezza. We saw a recent study at the American Diabetes Association scientific sessions where patients with type 2 diabetes who'd been taking multiple injections through the day simply switched their mealtime insulin from injected mealtime analog insulin to Afrezza, and they lowered their A1C just by changing the insulin and how that insulin works by 0.8%. So these are the tools that, you know, while everyone needs to find the tools that work for them, that as Dave talked about, what he pursues is more freedom, flexibility, and an opportunity to live life. And if that's more green, less red, more time in range, that's one thing. If you feel better and there's less hassle factor and less burden, then those opportunities, if they come with Afrezza for you as an individual user, by all means, we will talk you blue in the face about the data. So thanks for that segue, Danielle.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so we've gone over so many amazing things, and I could seriously talk about this at length. As you probably see, I'm pretty passionate about sharing this information because it has changed my life and so many of my clients' lives. I mean, I've actually been on a stage at a large diabetes conference where my blood sugar like kind of skyrockets when I do speaking engagements, and at that point I wasn't looping, and I won't get too much into that, but I'm also looping right now. And so at the end of it, everybody was kind of coming up to talk, which happens after I speak, which is wonderful. But I said, hold on, I need to take this Afrezza right now because I'm like 250 and I don't want to, and I swear I had this whole group of people, and I just wonder how many, I imagine that like half of them are, everybody was like, oh my gosh, I've been looking at this. I wanted to see this. I was actually at another event where I was, at an influencer event, and there were tons of people around the table internationally. And I mean, I had people from Brazil and Europe, and we were like passing it around the table, like show and tell. All these diabetes influencers, as I call them. I don't necessarily love that word either. I won't get into that. But this is something that people want. And so maybe one other question I have, because I don't know, where is Afrezza available? Is it only in the United States, or because I truly don't know, is it available outside of the United States, or is
Yeah, so currently, Danielle, it's approved for use in the U.S. And approved for use in adults 18 and above. We're in the midst of the next step in our pediatric program, so bringing this to kids, which for a lot of adolescents, young adults, being tethered or untethered from pump therapy is something they seek. But obviously, in the moment management, we are also approved in Brazil. So this is available to individuals living in Brazil, for those listening. And we're completing the final safety trial. It just started up a couple weeks ago in India. There are individual users throughout the world who can receive this on a compassionate use basis, but we do not market it outside of the U.S. and Brazil at present.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's coincidental or not, but I am also interviewing a lovely doctor from Brazil for this event, so you probably will get some interest in that from that. But yeah,
that's great.
Any other follow-up that you would like to add, Dave, on anything, wisdom, insight, experience, before we kind of bring this lovely chat to a close?
You gotta try it. If I mean, I gotta be careful, but it's such an amazing. It's difficult to understand conceptually if you haven't tried it.
Agreed.
I always thought the half units, 0.5 units, was important. You needed carb count directly, exactly, and I don't think I've ever carb counted 100% correctly. I mean, I was at a conference one time. I watched 3 diabetes educators looking at a sandwich for kids, counting, and every one of them had a different carb count on the exact same sandwich they're staring at, within 10 or 15 grams. So it's I like to say diabetes is about 40% art or 40% science, 60% art form with type 1 specifically, because there's so many factors that influence your blood sugar on a daily basis. I never thought a fixed dose insulin would work in me, and since then, I've never had a thought about going back to a pump. With the better basals out now, in addition to the Afrezza, it's just less management and better outcomes and more freedom and flexibility through the day. I get all that time back with my family, with my kids when I get home.
Sounds
I don't
pretty dry to me. Yeah.
And Danielle, I'll close with what Dave said, and that's that really with Afrezza, just like any new therapy or approach to treatment for those listening, you have to try it to understand it. And I will be the first to admit that not any one solution works for everyone, but understanding that we are getting past the perceived precision of carb counting and dose timing and supplemental dosing and boluses. The fact that we have to tell pumps to give square wave boluses or dual wave boluses and or corrections now with some of the hybrid closed loop systems tells us that we're still playing catch up with our injected insulin, not the ketchup that you put on your hamburger, but catching up as it may be to the time action profile of insulin. So having something that truly works in the moment for many people, as we know Afrezza does, working within the first 15 minutes and having its peak effect well within the first hour after taking it, frees up life, and it frees up time, as Dave referred to. Danielle, thanks so much for all you've done to help us share the information and to provide us the opportunity to join you today.
No, it's really my pleasure. And I'll just close out by saying thank you from, probably behalf of me, and I won't say all patients, but when we hear a doctor say that they truly understand that there's not only one way to manage diabetes well, thank you, because that's true. That's why I do this summit. I like to present a whole bunch of really well-known people who have different ways of managing their diabetes, so encourage people to experiment and be grateful that they get to experiment if they do, because it really is a blessing. So thank you for saying that, and thank both of you for taking the time out of your day to chat and for what you're doing here, because like we said, this is innovation in the current moment, and God knows we need that in insulin. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks again, Danielle. The summit has been a superb service, and sharing the word on this and other tools that can allow people to live their lives well is incredibly important. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank everybody for watching. And the MannKind website, the Afrezza website, will be directly under this video. If you're watching, you probably already clicked it, I assume. But if not, go ahead and check it out. And stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the interviews. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.